Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Joining us today is Professor Dominik Lengyel, who will be presenting the visualization of hypotheses as a balancing act between science and illustration. Professor Lengyel has been a full university professor and chair of architecture and visualization at the BTU Brandenburg University of Technology, Cottbus, Schenftenberg since 2006. He studied mathematics and physics for a year before studying architecture at the University of Stuttgart in Germany, where he graduated with distinction and an architecture prize in 1997 after 2 years abroad at the École d'Architecture Paris, Tobiac, and ETH Zurich in Switzerland. He worked as an architect in the planning department of the architectural office of Professor O.M. Unger in Cologne, Germany, where he also founded an office for architectural visualization together with Catherine Toulouse. He first became a deputy professor, then a full professor at the Cologne University of Applied Sciences, and was offered a position as a full professor in Mainz, where he had to turn down due to the call from the BTU. He is a member of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts in Salzburg. His research projects are funded by the German Research Foundation, the private German Gerda Henkel Foundation for Historical Humanities, and the Federal Ministries for Education and Research for Economic Affairs and Energy, and for the Interior Building and Housing, among others. Please join us in welcoming Professor Lengyel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this very kind introduction, and thank you for attending. I can't see how many of you are online, but I will see afterwards. So, the balancing act is an interesting approach because we try to include knowledge and methodology of architecture, of being able to design geometry, design shapes that stand for complex contents, like the wish of a building client to build something, into the fields of humanities, especially archaeology, but also art history and also Islamic art history. And for that, we developed a methodology that we call visualization of uncertainty. But as uncertainty is quite ambiguous as a term itself, for today, we chose the title Visualization of Hypotheses, which is a little bit more concrete, but it does exclude some things because uncertainty means also certain knowledge. Certain knowledge is, for example, the findings, but uncertain knowledge is primarily the hypothesis around. And a hypothesis can be contradictory, which means that if the basis of the hypothesis is ambivalent and can change, then of course the hypothesis can also be contradictory. So it's quite a long introduction, and the idea is to click once, okay? This one, okay? The idea is to start with a perception of heritage. So what do you see and what do you perceive if you look at heritage sites? And then we talk about the abstraction and the design and the photography parts of the methodology of visualization of uncertainty. Then a quite important aspect of it, which is contextualization, because if certain knowledge in case of findings is part of the study, then they are usually isolated in museums, in collections, in archives. And the contextualization is the key point to put them in their original context. So in their original context, in the sense of what scientists think could be their original context, which then in most cases is abstract geometry, architecture around. And this is where we architects come into play. In the end, then the case study, which is Islamic architecture and art, quite famous and very important metropolis opposite Seleucia in today Iraq. And then I just entered or added an epilogue about how to compose images. That's just finished yesterday for the Museum of Antique Collection, Plaster Collection in Munich. And I think it's interesting in the end for some 8 more slides. It's going to be quite a lot of slides. I hope you are visual. So don't worry if it's going fast. So still isn't working. Check this one. Okay. So this is one of the sites that you may visit in near Naples, and what you see is primarily architecture, but maybe you see in the first glance, oh, it's a site about antiquity. And The reason why you interpret this as a site of antiquity is probably the columns in front. Because if you have columns in front, then, and especially if they are arranged like that, you immediately think, it's a museum. Oh, it's a site. Careful, don't touch, don't move. Just take photos and then go out again. But for us architects, it's a setting, a very fascinating setting of arches and vaults and corridors and sideways, and it's a space to move in. And I just show you a series of images that in our sense reveals the quality of the space primarily without relating it to antiquity. So maybe you just fantasize the columns away, and then you see something like a cellar or a basement, or even just a spatial composition. And I chose that series of pictures because it gets less and less particular of being an amphitheater basement. So now in this last slide, if you now think that the column just not being there, you could be in any cave. And that makes the quality of this basement. Now, that means in the end that if you perceive heritage, it's always a kind of biased interpretation of what you expect you want to see. And if you see a mountain like that, which is now the Pergamon site, you may think of the site because we approached Pergamon, which is the village on the right side here, and you may be preoccupied by now entering or approaching a historical archaeological site even. But what you see on the mountain, the most important building parts is Byzantic fortress, and is not antique. And so archaeology tends to then reconstruct visually how antiquity might have looked like. And one of the examples that is quite famous is is a cinema still, the movie Troy, 2004. It's quite old. I like it because it's well done. Artistically, it's well done. It really looks beautiful. But the trouble is that the difficulty and the error within is kind of digital, because it shows the palace as a multi-story building. And as all the archaeologists we've talked to till now emphasize that the palaces of Troy has been single story, so bungalow type. The error in this image is undiscussable, although it's well done. So the problem here is that people, even if you tell them it's not true, this image is just burned in the minds for 20 years now, quite old. And millions of people think they know how Troy looked. And the problem is not that it's neatly done. The problem is that the kind of image of being photorealistic sort of switches off criticism in the perception. So even if you know it's not true, you remember that image as it's real. So the idea is now to use abstraction in the sense of idealizing architectural thinking to make it see the hypothesis in an intuitive way. So that if you look at it, you immediately understand this is not reality in the sense of photorealistic. This might be another reality. And this also is reality. It's a black square. It's also named like that. But in the essence, it provokes interpretation and fantasy. And this is a kind of, I have to do a field research about how many % of people do fantasize on this image. But I heard hypothesis about the ratio about 10%. I don't know. You can check by yourself. The longer you look at the image, do you get fantasy and ideas? Is it like a firework or not? Because some people just find it boring. They say it's just a black square. So it depends on where you are. But if we architects see this art installation, for us, it's immediately town planning. It's an urban structure. It's not stacked white cubes at all. So only in the second look, we would say, but it doesn't matter at all. Same with this thing. It's a skyscraper. It's not cubes, outlines stacked again. So to make it even more clear, this is a kind of work of art I like because it's double indirect. It's called not 4 pieces of concrete. It's called 3 streets. So it's even naming the space in between, which is not even part of the work of art. But how to make this make you feel of looking at architecture, although this is quite small. It's 25 centimeters high, an inch, 10. And if you encounter the space, you just see these things on the floor. But we will come back to that later. So first, how to make designing abstract modeling and how to create these substitutes that are essentially substitutes. We've visualized that temple edge near Pergamon, and as you can see, the findings on the left allow the reconstruction of almost everything except the capital. So we needed a capital of Corinthian type, but not being able to pretend that the capital was there. So we developed a kind of series of graphical geometrical abstraction, and the methodology is to go as far as you can to make it resemble the type in an unambiguous way, but at the same time choosing the one that unambiguously also says, I am not original. So of course we omit the step too far, which is important methodologically to be certain that we've reached the right level of abstraction. So in the middle you see at once, intuitively, this is a Corinthian capital, but at the same time, you know, of course, you have to be kind of skilled or educated in a certain way. You know that this is not a Corinthian capital. It's just a type. And that's what we talk about. Immediately grasping what it's about, what archaeologists want to say and what they don't want to say. This is what we call uncertainty. So the same with urban planning. The left column you see in excavation results. And then we did twofold analysis. The middle one is the geometric analysis, which is sizes, and the right column is topologic analysis, which is connection between the entities. And in the next step, we reverse engineered to create, based on the second and third column, variations, and then create things that look like the first column, but which are completely fictitious. But this allowed us to create the slope of Pergamon, which you can see does not resemble reality, physical reality, but it resembles the idealistic reality of how architects and even, and that's the point, archaeologists would talk about the building types of that time and this area and that slope. So you have stairs, you have ramps, and you have streets, horizontal streets for carriages and stairs for vertical circulation. And then you have this. If you would describe, you would say a maximum length of roof bars and a certain slope and a certain distribution of courtyards and peristyles and different kinds of buildings, and of course get the water away. Very important. Now this methodology allowed us to fill the entire mountain of Pergamon around in a way that resembles the type of buildings that archaeologists assume to be probable, and at the same time, intuitively not reconstruct, not simulate physical reality. And the reason why it looks so natural is that it's done by hand, by hundreds of students in our seminars. We divided them to give each single student a kind of parcel, and explained the way that buildings were constructed at that time, and then let them just design. Being architects, design their kind of small section of holiday resort, if you want to call it like that. So in the end, we had a completely heterogeneous, but still following certain rules, not repetitive, and not in any kind algorithmically created cityscape. Another example that shows different knowledge certainties, you can see here, this is Cologne Cathedral. You have the Gothic choir, which stands today. You have the last predecessor on the right, which was cut in half exactly in the middle axe to allow the construction of the Gothic choir, which is quite well known because of contemporary depictions of medieval ages. And on the left, you have a church that was almost not registered, not documented. There are fundaments allowing to claim a main nave, 2 cross naves, 2 apses, and 4 towers. And because we don't know much more than these words, all you can see on the left is what I've just told you. And now to make the things comparable, we did not depict the existing choir as it is today, because then it would be materialized with joints and dirt and all that, but reduced it to the same kind of architectural idealistic way, to be white and regular, so all the pillars are identical. In reality, they are not totally identical. And this way of dematerializing it, you see different kinds of materializing it. You see different kinds of architectural styles next to each other, allowing you to compare as they are in the idea of being architects' designs. So you have Gothic versus Romantic versus simple Romantic in one consistent image. So sometimes we have to reduce the knowledge in order to work together with architecture styles that we don't know much about. It's a kind of weighing against. But why white? So actually it's not white, actually it's a black and white photography. And to make you understand the difference between a white building and black and white photography, there is one element in the image that could be, without controversy, be colored without even changing the state of knowledge, and that's the sky. And if you now look at the sky turning blue, concentrate on the building and observe what happens to the building when the sky changes its quality. So now you have a white building, and that's the important difference. Because this is not a white building, it's black and white photography. And there are many competitors in the field that use black and white buildings now, but they don't dare to make the sky gray because they think it's ugly. The blue sky is more beautiful, and don't realize the difference in perception, that this is not a white building. So if the findings are polychromous, we can follow the same methodology, only showing what we know and not inducing any fantastic creativity that we, of course, would have if we wanted. And in this case, it's the interior of the same Gothic choir. It's a later age. It's around 1856 now, just before the demolition of the wall. The wall, if you've seen from the outside, so it's this wall here in the middle, the same wall that we have in front now. And just before the demolition, they inaugurated the singing choir, and they just wanted to see how it looked like. So the only colored element that is not based on findings is the organ. But it's so unimportant in its color. It's just showing, well, it's wood, essentially, and it has been wood. This is known. All the rest is documented in its detailed color. Now, why is photography so important? And we actually call it virtual photography because we think that we just follow photographic rules and it's not a rendering. Most people would say if you have a digital model, you do a rendering. Yes, it's true, but a rendering implies so little of photography that we prefer to call it virtual photography. And this is actually the epilogue that I added in the end. So back to our work of art in Vienna. All you have to do to understand or to immediately understand the architectonic impact of this work of art is bend down your head on the floor or the camera, as you will show here. And unlike this image where you think concrete blocks, this is immediate architecture. And this depends on 2 main factors. The first main factor is, of course, bending the head down. Yes. This is what we call eye level. But the second thing is straight lines. Because usually you do ordinary photography, or you have, even in the news, some people that just shoot on photography. It's mostly neglected that perpendicular lines remain perpendicular. And in real architecture, it doesn't really matter, because in real architecture, this is Bernminster, you understand architecture because you know architecture. But in case of abstract geometry, you might get completely confused because it doesn't reveal as many clues as real architecture of being oriented in space vertically. So what we need to do in digital images is to be careful to remain vertical when you have vertical geometry. Just think of the fortification of Troy again, which is slightly tilt, and this slightly tilt orientation is expressing fortification. So sometimes the slightest tilting is expressing very important things in architecture. Now, if you have to have Rome, Palatine Palaces in this case, if you have to have an overview, the misunderstanding potential lies in the point of view, again, because this is, of course, not eye level. So you might stand on a mountain, and to intuitively make you as far as possible not think of standing on a mountain is use projection, which is not perspective, but parallel. It's called axonometric. And axonometric projections don't have this point in space for the projection. It's just all parallel, which means that if you shift now the projection or the scene before your eyes, nothing changes except the section of the image. It's illimited in each direction, and it means that parallel lines in space remain parallel in the projection. You can even stress this method of projection by using the so-called skewed axonometry, which is even surrealistic. So this one is almost surrealistic. It equals the projection from a very distant point in space. Could be a satellite image or so. But this is not realistic. It's entirely surrealistic because it shows the unskewed plan, and at the same time it shows the sides. It's a very common projection technique for churches for the last centuries of architecture. So all we do is just assembling centuries-old traditions and putting them together to digital images. So again, it's parallel, and you understand the space very well, and you can see straight angles, but at the same time you see the sides, so it's more spatial than a pure plan. Contextualization is how to put things that are found in space or in other circumstances back in architecture. Sudan, royal city of Naga, around 0 CE or BCE, the black 0 or the red 0. Things in space and architecture in the mind, especially vernacular architecture above these stripes of stones here in the front. This is vernacular architecture, the fundaments. And of course, it looked completely different. And this is all that archaeologists have developed as hypotheses. You see the temples which are standing on site, and you see the vernacular architecture. And now the challenge was to develop a kind of vision of the cityscape, which is quite difficult because there's almost nothing. Now, what we did is choose virtual photography-like points in space, then project them in a very high resolution and create kind of panoramas, 14 meters long with 100 dot per inch resolution to put them in the museum. Now, so you have the panorama and the close-up. It's all within the same image. So these are real close-ups of the same panorama. And it worked like if you were on site in the museum, you had this as backdrop from the original findings. And this is one of the temples seen from the inside. And again, what we are architects interested in is the temporality of approaches. And this special particular vision of being in a very dark inside and looking out to the sun is timeless again. This is Kumar near Naples again, a completely different site, millions, thousands of kilometers away, but a very similar impression. So in Munich, it was exhibited like this, a kind of real scale wallpaper to make you feel being inside the temple. It's a little bit turned around because these stones stood in front of the temple. But it just worked well because you were inside a building, and now you have this look from the inside to the outside. But the second one was even more interesting. That was the backdrop. Because if you stand there in the museum and look at these heads, and you have this high resolution image on the back of them, the eyes accumulate for the short distance. And so the resolution of the image in the back was higher than what the eye needed. And it worked like It made you feel standing in the desert immediately. So for Pergamon, again, it's a different approach because this temple, it's an altar, sorry, it's not a temple. This altar stood in the cityscape in a very similar way. And we took this photography from the southwest corner of the terrace for the altar. And strangely enough, before we came into play being architects, this perspective has never been used in publications about the altar, which we find strange because it's a very attractive, from the cityscape point of view, very attractive point of view. You see the complete setting of the Acropolis. You see the Trajan's temple of the Romans on the left. You see the Athena sanctuary. You even see a very small part of the Athena temple, the oldest and most important in the liturgical ceremony. And you see the royal castle. You see the altar, of course. And if you turn around, you see the whole city. And when a famous panorama drawing by an artist was done, he erected a scaffolding in front of the Athena temple about here. And the scaffolding is 8 meters tall, with the argument that you needed that to have a cityscape. And after that, we just checked if the antique architects did not think about that. And of course they did. This is the cityscape point of view. And maybe they just constructed this artificial terrace. And it goes 20 meters down here if you fall back to the left. They probably constructed it just to get this prospect of the city. So that's one of the overall ambitions for us to explore these antique sites, to look for architectural timeless qualities that people thought about 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago already, as we do today, or maybe even better. An amphitheater project in Durrës in today's Albania shows this problematic challenge again. There's almost nothing left, and if we compared it with the closest next example of different, quite similar area and quite similar topological setting and political setting. And it might have been the model for Albania. This is Pula, a little bit north in Croatia, much better preserved, but no tunnels. So we needed the tunnels to, our archaeologists needed the tunnel to develop this theory about being totally asymmetrical in construction and circulation. You see strangely cut things, and it's half in the mountain, and all the vomitoria are irregular. It looks totally natural from the sea, except the closed arches, which is rock. It looks totally natural if you approach it. It looks just like the Colosseum. So it's all the things that you would expect to see. Kuma again for the walls, and you have the entrance. The systematics, it's all about idealization. So this is the ideal entrance into an amphitheater. And if you compare this with Vienna, it's almost similar. This is the standard vomitorium. So idealization, and this is all very important to understand before we come to our Ktesiphon example, which is very, very less concrete. But again, Palatine, this is what it looks today. This is how Piranesi looked at it, and this is what we did of it. And again, it was us architects, strangely enough, to, for the first time, look from this point of view to the Palatine palaces. The story behind it is that archaeologists presume that it was completely under construction for centuries, so it never looked like that. It was always scaffolded, because they just wanted to show to the public, to the populace, that they were just very, very rich and they could afford this transforming the palaces all the time. And so we thought, well, if it was to impress the populace, why not show it from a seat of being on the upper part of the seating and seeing these palaces, actually looking at the spectacle of the circus, but watching also the scaffolding, or in this case, the idealized version of the palaces on top. There were some parts of the reconstruction that were built or painted or drawn by people in the 16th century, which were then demolished or just not demolished, but they disappeared afterwards. So we had contemporary drawings for reconstructing this. Septiconium, on the left, you see the circus again. But for us architects, again, the most fascinating thing is the courtyards on top. Because these courtyards are, again, of an architectural quality that we consider timeless. Just think the columns and the details away and the capitals away, and you could feel yourself in a contemporary Congress Center. It's so beautifully done, the sequence of courtyards and walkways and dark and light and water basins. You could just take it as an example for today, whatever you want, hotel lobby or. So Ktesiphon is a very, very difficult site. It's in Metropolis, but the findings and the excavations are very distinct, and they are very heterogeneous in quality. So we find ourselves in today Iraq. There are contemporary reconstructional drawings of the setting, and you immediately see it's a pattern of almost nothing. So there is a little bit, but so the first thing we did was repaint this plan to explain a little bit what is where. But you see, it's all lined. Also, the borders of the city are totally unclear, and the Tigris shape changed its shape and so on. Now, the excavations were done more than 100 years ago, and they were recovered by soil, so there's agriculture on top of them. So we needed these photographies, and this is what we could do with it. And this is quite different from the other projects, because of course we could now fill it with fantastic pattern, but we wanted to restrict it in this case to better zoom in with the camera, so get closer, and show what we might talk about that. And you see here a kind of generic texture of a city of that type, of that time in this era. But again, this image particularly talks about one finding in this corner here. But the difficulty is already which of the rooms is covered and which is open. And we did a series of alternatives here, also for the museum, for the presentation for the public, to understand the difficulty visually without explanation. You see the same space, 1, 2, 3, with alternative closing. So the big courtyard in the middle is open, of course, because it's so big, but the others are totally unknown. So this is what we call uncertain knowledge. You see 3 things at the same time next to each other is better than after each other. But now you see visually uncertainty in its raw content. Photography is sometimes shown these pieces that are very strange, that nobody knows what they served for, or where they were installed. So we need them a little bit, but totally unclear. This is one space which is particularly because it contains the single polychromous statue found there, and it's even Christian. So maybe it's only colored because it's so young compared to the other. And all we could do, the archaeologists did not allow us to go any further, was to create a kind of generic space, totally abstract. It does not really fit our vision of ideal architecture of that space, but they did not let us to go further than to show this color statue in a black and white. I know of the difficulty of the blue sky. we couldn't stop them. And this is the second or third part of Ktesiphon you need to now bear in your mind to get this overall image of the city. Because the next one is the stadium. The stadium is quite clear in its appearance, so they are quite certain about what it looked like. Then you have more ornaments. This is the measure about the depth. It's an important information, but this is what it really looked like. Then you have contemporary, or not, no, you have first excavation hypothetical drawings of that. It's kind of an idealistic mental image. It's not even correct geometry. It's not a perspective, it's a mental image. So what we created is a perspective image of that mental image, and this looks like that. We have more findings, we have more photographies, we have more close-ups, and what we did here is take the next mental image, combine it with measured findings in the museum, look at the findings at the museum, also analyze them, which is original, which not, because it's not so much original as you would think at the first glance, and then put it also then again into a setting that recontextualizes them with a kind of trompe-l'oeil, which was used in the Renaissance mostly. So if you enter the museum space in Berlin, you think you have an audience hall in the back with this recontextualized ornaments that I've just shown you before, and the fragments that are there. And you can sit in this E1, but in reality, it's a trompe-l'oeil. So if you see from the side, so it's just a print on the wall, and you can sit in, but you don't sit in, you sit before. So the closer you get, the more it reveals it doesn't work. So we calculate the perspective to the point where you enter the space, and it worked quite well. People really approached and were disappointed that just the trompe-l'oeil. Now, why is it important? Because audience hall are called to be prototyped by the Taq-e Kisra in Ktesiphon. So you all know that. So we show to the public that overview. And how is it today? Well, bad shape. This is 2013. It's been conserved like that. I think it may stay like that. It was like that before. And we took this drawing also. And there were reconstruction drawings by Italian archaeologists that we just put on. But it has been much better when photography was invented. And we also could take this as an original for the reconstruction of the facade. Now we have quite a well spatial impression of that space. And you get an idea of the building opposite, which might also have been an audience hall, but this already is totally unsure. This is why we don't show more of it. We just show the looking out of it. It's again a very important photographical decision, what to show or not to show. So we show here that there's something that we stand in and that we have the audience hall opposite, but we don't know what it is, so we can't show it. And seeing from the side, and that's the first time, so it resembles the photography of 2013, but it's complete. And we did not want to show more. So this is all we know, not more, but not less. It's an exact, what we call translation from words and knowledge into image. Still reveals architectonic qualities. It talks architecturally. You think you are in front of it, and of course, you have to be adopted a little bit to abstract geometry, but you don't have to have lots of fantasy to fantasize yourself in standing there on site. And this was the former conclusion of the talk. It's just very interesting that the state of Iraq really identifies itself with this very interesting building. So the conclusion would be that digital visualization consists, if you do it seriously, of design of abstraction, refusing and rejecting proposed reality by fantasizing virtual reality and imitating Hollywood, and using but using virtual photography to make abstract geometry look as if it was built. And this is the most important thing, we think, and this is the epilogue I created for you half an hour ago, because we're just dealing with this. The Museum for Plaster Collection in Munich wants to have 6 new perspectives of Pergamon of the gymnasium, and this is the 5 which are not existing. And just to give you a glance of how difficult virtual photography is. So this is the model. You would say, okay, this is the model, it's done, or you have all you need is there. And if we take the arrows that the museum wished, in a sense, from us, from the digital model, this is what you get. And this is what we make of it. And this took about 10 steps and lots of negotiation and, of course, experience and a kind of photographical immersing yourself, fantasizing yourself, being on site. What would you look at? What would you want to see, and what would you see, and where do you stand, and what kind of lighting? It's all realistic lighting, so I can't tell you the time and the day, but it's changing, seasons and daytime, of course. And it's getting difficult and more and more difficult because how do you present this thing? It's just not architecture. It's very strange. And so you have to think about, of course, the context is in the model too. I'm cheating a little bit. The context is there, but it's a kind of angle. So on the left side, we always start with 11 millimeters focal length to see the overall. And the solution on the right side is 24 millimeters standard lens, standard photographic lens, standard analog photographic lens. And you have this courtyard, which is a little easier. But again, what do you do with this totally empty square in the middle? You could fill it with dirt, what most people would do, or you just use the light. And with the light, you have it filled. And it reveals a lot of spatial qualities, and you do not want to have dirt anymore. So we like to call it blood, sweat, and tears, according to the band. But blood, sweat, and tears really talks about what people would usually put in the scene on the left to make it look neat or attractive. But I mean, if you want to stick with science, you just take what you know, and you know the sun was there all the time, so you can use it just for filling. It's theatrical stage design, if you want, but it fulfills its efforts. Or this was the most difficult one. A long hall with nothing, and then a terrace with nothing, and even in the view on the right, there's nothing. So what can you do? Use an architectonic special lens, for photography lens, that can shift to the left and shift to upways. So you have a double shift here, and then use a light again and concentrate on the things that are at least a little bit interesting. And now you have an attractive sort of colonnade on the right, which is probably Metropolitan Museum of New York. Yeah, that kind of language, and you lose all the boring things that you have on the left side. Or that is one terrace up, similar setting, little to see, but there's a temple on the end. So we switched the length of the lens from 11 millimeters to I can't tell, probably 120 millimeters or 200 even. Just close up, use the sun again, and then it's okay. I mean, at least it's an attractive place again. And I will see what the museum will see, but we are confident that they will like it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I can manage the questions if you'd like. I use a computer, so you